Hey, it's Marcel. Let me get honest with you for a minute. We've reached a time in history when building up strong leaders truly matters if you want to grow your business. But managing through fear, command and control, and do as I say ways of managing is not going to get you there. So, what will? In my research, I found that the most effective leadership boils down to 6 key behaviors. They are behaviors that, when filtered down to every management level, can create high performance in your teams and build a great work culture. By the way, this is the new topic that I speak on at company events and conferences and virtual stages all over the world. It's great for keynotes, webinars, half-day or full-day workshops, and leadership retreats. So if you want to learn a clear and practical framework to help design the best work environment for your people to flourish, this is the way to go, and I can show you how to do it. To book me for your event, visit my website, marcelschwantes.com, and click on Speaking. Enjoy the show.
The future of work isn't about shareholder value, technology, metrics, or automation. It's about being human and putting people first through actionable love. Welcome to the Love in Action podcast, where we hold deep conversations with extraordinary people to help you grow as a leader and expand your business. Here's your host, Marcel Schwantes.
Hey, glad you are here, and happy Thursday or Friday, wherever you are around the globe. And thanks for choosing to spend time with us. We are grateful. And if you like what you hear, hey, do us a favor and let someone else know about the Love in Action podcast and share it on social media, because doing so will help us get to our goal of 1 million downloads. And we would be grateful for that. So let's flash back to March of 2020. Business leaders, many of you listening right now, you were forced to face so many challenges when COVID hit. We pivoted overnight, literally. But the thing is here, folks, is that, the world of work was already changing before a global pandemic. That's the reality. And a lot of leaders kind of missed the signs. We kind of missed the trend lines, if you will, of what has now become the permanently changed work environment that, we find ourselves in. Now, I also know that there's still a lot of uncertainty, even in the post-pandemic age that we find ourselves in, because everything is now different. And here's the thing is, a lot of leaders will certainly have evolved, right, with the times, but a lot of other leaders are trying to force people back into how things were. It's a strange time. So to help us navigate the uncertainty of a post-pandemic world, the author team of Heather McGowan and Chris Shipley have released a new book called The Empathy Advantage: Leading the Empowered Workforce. And this is a sequel to their previous book. If you have it in your bookshelf, you'll know that book was called The Adaptation Advantage. And so this time, Heather and Chris focus on empathy to help leaders to lay the foundations for a high-performing work environment. So I'm honored that Heather has agreed to join us today. She is one of the leading voices on the fourth industrial revolution. Her groundbreaking approach to the future of work and learning has made employees more fulfilled and innovative, leaders more potent and empathetic, and businesses more effective at reaching their goals in a rapidly evolving market. And I can't wait to dive into this conversation. And Heather is here, and she now joins us. Heather, welcome to the Love in Action podcast.
Hey there. Thank you, Marcel, so much for having me. I look forward to this conversation.
I think we're going to have fun. So we start every episode like this. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's roll.
What's your story?
Well, my story, to quote Steve Jobs, is the dots don't make sense looking forwards. They only make sense looking backwards. And so the one thing that I think consistent across my entire life is I was always curious why people behave the way they do. And so I found myself, I went to art school undergrad. I worked in product design, design strategy. I went to business school, got an MBA, worked in finance and boutique investment banking. Then I fell into academic work, helping do what I now know is building the future of work, but I didn't have that language then. And I built a new college focused on innovation, created new curriculums to help people prepare for dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah.
And then I found myself along the way, I was also doing corporate consulting in white space exploration. I found myself along the way that on the supply side, which is education, I was explaining why we weren't building the workforce that we needed and how we needed to change that. And then on the demand side, I was explaining how we weren't screening for the right talent, organizing it in the right way to build the future that we needed. And those explanations became their own thing in about 2018. So now I'm a keynote speaker on the future of work, explaining to corporations all over the world how to prepare for rapid uncertainty and ambiguity.
Yeah. Love it. Okay. So, and that's such a big theme in your book. So let's dive into the empathy advantage. But first, give us kind of the big idea behind the book.
Okay. So it just got to step back and connect the two books. It makes the most sense. So Chris Shipley and I, we met in Australia when I was giving one of my first talks in 2015. And at the time she was working at MIT, which was, I think, 3 miles from my house in Boston. And we flew halfway around the world to meet. We found we had a common vision on what was happening in the world. She came from Silicon Valley tech sector. I could come from a disparate set of experiences.
Right.
And what we found was happening was that technology was accelerating. We were still preparing people for routine and predictable jobs, largely to work in isolation with a single set occupational identity. And so we wrote The Adaptation Advantage, Let Go, Learn Fast to Thrive in the Future of Work, to prepare for that reality, which was emerging around us, but people weren't really sensing it or feeling it. That came out in April 2020. That would be about a month after the World Health Organization declared it a global pandemic. And what it ended up being was sort of an accidental guide to how do you manage during the pandemic. And then as we went through it, and I continued to speak, it went virtual for a while, then in person, then virtual as the variants came out, I started realizing that some fundamental shifts have taken place. One, a changed relationship between individuals and organizations. The workforce was empowered, and I don't think the leadership had gotten that yet. And it was because of 3 reasons. One, the pandemic was an existential crisis that questioned all of us to say, what am I doing with my life? Is this worth it? Is this a good use of my time? We felt the fragility of life and the finiteness of time. So we had that.
Yeah.
Then we had the boomers starting to retire at a really accelerated clip, some of them because of the pandemic, because they were the most vulnerable age-wise. So we started to feel the labor shortages. And then Gen Z entered the workforce. And Gen Z is a very different generation, and they are not willing to compromise on a number of things that the rest of us were. So the 3 of those together created an empowered workforce. Calling more of the shots, looking for, I want to work with a sense of purpose. I want to have an impact. I'm not going to sacrifice certain aspects of my life for a job. So it was a repurposing. I say everyone got focused on where they work, but it was really where work fits in their lives. Yeah. So that was one of the big ones. The second one was we'd had about 15, 17 years of digital disruption. So now organizations can rapidly change because they're largely digital. So you see organizations change from one business model to another, one market to another, one service sector to another. And you can't use the maps and models of the past with that much change and uncertainty and a fluid and empowered workforce. So those 2 things together, leaders cannot be unquestioned experts making decisions in certainty and calling all the shots. They really have to rely on the human beings in their organization to go on these learning tours, explorations, because we're seeing rapid changes in conditions and business models, and you've got to rely on your people to swarm towards those opportunities. And in order to do that, the answer is empathy, because the answer is that's how you activate the human potential in these people. So it's not a guide to here's how to be more empathetic. It's here's what's happening in the world. Here are these 2 big shifts. And the most effective way you can lead is to be an empathetic leader.
Right, right. And speaking of those shifts, this is why right off the bat, I think it was in your introduction, this quote kind of hit me, okay? And you're right, and I quote, "The pandemic was merely a fast-acting catalyst for changes that had been afoot for a decade or longer," right?
Yeah.
And because a lot of people will use the pandemic as an excuse for the Great Resignation, for burnout in the workplace, right? And this all of a sudden change in demographic, a shift in demographic or a shift in culture, right? But you're basically saying that some of these things have been around for a while, up to
I mean, just take the Great
decade.
Resignation. This is when I talk to people about. Everyone considers that it's over. We only added 187,000 jobs this month. It was supposed to be 200. They've been declaring a recession coming, a hard landing, a soft landing. It's not going to end when you have labor shortages. It's just simply not. And we've had a sort of a shift in what's acceptable in work. So it used to be you had to be in a certain job or role for X number of years.
Yeah.
Now you can be there as long as it is for you to acquire the skills and knowledge to be more valuable somewhere else. And people want to stay in organizations where they can learn faster than they can on their own, where they feel like they belong, they feel a connection to the culture, they feel a connection to each other, which does not have to take place in person. But that's how people stay. Now, when you look at churn in the labor market, it actually started increasing after the last recession. So churn has been building since 2009. And when people declared the sort of Great Resignation over in 2021, more people quit in 2022 than 2021. And we're on track for more people to quit, even more people to quit in 2023. So we're looking at about a 30% churn in the labor market. If that's your new reality, you can't lead the way you used to lead. Yeah, so our workers today, and I just use demographics as shorthand. It's not,
Sure.
So we've got some millennial leaders. Every once in a while we have a Gen Z leader, but we have millennial leaders. Largely it's Gen X leaders, which most people don't understand that generation at all. I'm a member of that generation. We need a marketing department. And we've got a handful of boomers. We still have some boomers in leadership positions. But all of those folks became leaders in an arena that was office-centric. And so there's a reliance, and I think an over-reliance on the office. If we were to rebuild work today, with the office have never existed before, we would have built a place for us to come together, but differently, maybe not every day, maybe not for every job. We would have optimized where and how can we get the best human performance, the best balance so that we're optimizing our human potential, the best integration of life and work and community and belonging and human potential. And it wouldn't be a cubicle. That's not the answer we would have come up with, I'm quite sure. So we have to realize that a lot of the folks, when I speak to leaders, and I do this pretty much a couple times a week, is I know that you became successful with presenteeism, with sacrificing, with fighting commuter traffic, for winning because you were the first person and the last person to leave the office. And this next generation is not going to put up with that. And I know it sucks. You cannot lead successfully the way you were led. Full stop.
Yeah.
So we have to have empathy for the fact that leaders are in this position now, like, well, I know what made me successful and I want to make the next generation successful the same way. It's just not going to work. What you've got to do is say, how do I optimize the potential of every single person on my team? What are the conditions under which they work best? How and when do I bring them together? Why do I bring them together? What are these unique things that we do when we're together in person or we're together digitally? How do we best collaborate? How do we get the best potential out of all team members collectively?
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about this book is that, when we think about empathy, we think of empathy in an interpersonal one-on-one or one to a group context, right? You are pulling this back and bringing it to a large systemic level, cultural level, which it can, impact many, many lives in and out of the organization. So fantastic. So I think it's a great segue to part 2 of the book, and that is a call to rethink your organization. So the call to action that you start with is the need for leaders to, and I quote, upgrade their operating model or operating system, if you will. So can you unpack that a little bit? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think what you're alluding to, and I just want to point it out, is the first part of the book is meet your new workforce. Like, it is not the workforce that you were or you think they are. Part 2 is how do you operate, how do you organize work? And part 3 is how do you think about yourself as a leader? How do you lead in this reality? Yeah. So in the part 2 you just asked about, we used to just say, okay, we're going to make a 3-year plan. Well, I quote Margaret Hefferman, who pointed out some research in her book, Uncharted, the best foresight people out there can do like 12, 18 months at best. Yet we make 3-year plans and we use models that, frameworks and models that worked in 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, completely irrelevant often to the conditions that we're in.
And
So
sometimes we don't even follow through on those plans.
Right. That we'll have fixed jobs, fixed organizational structures. We will have 3 to 5 year plans. None of that really ever has not made sense for probably more than a decade, but it really doesn't make sense now. So, take something like a job description. So what is a job description? A job description is a list of requirements and responsibilities that are largely defined by the last person who held that job. How much of that is still relevant? And by the time you get the person, the individual you're looking for, and get them on board, how similar is that need to the one you had defined in the description? So I think, and it's going to be hard for organizations to move away from fixed jobs. We have to think about it more like a rugby scrum, or instead of fixed positions or swarming to a project. Because what we're going to have people do is be on flexible teams, do tours of duty, which Reid Hoffman talked about more than 10 years ago, work more like a consulting organization where a problem is going to come in front of us. We're going to have teams that swarm to it. Now, there'll be people in the organization that are charged with just keeping the trains running on time and the existing products and services, but a large part of the organization is going to be swarming to that new opportunity.
Okay, so in order to upgrade your operating model, leaders need to create the conditions for employees to thrive, because workers today are so much different. They have different needs, different wants than previous generations. So one of the things is one of those things for me that I noticed is, it's a catch term now, a buzzword, and that is belonging, right? But I like this. I like where we're going with this conversation because, we talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion on this show, but probably not enough about belonging. But maybe tell us a little bit about the difference between belonging and, say, inclusion, and why is it so important?
So diversity is representation, equity is fairness, inclusion is actions, and belonging is the feeling. So if you don't have belonging, so I think it should be DEIB. That's it, just DEIB. I mean, I know some people have abbreviated the initials and that's their intent. But when you have belonging, you're not censoring when you show up at work. You're bringing your whole self to work and you're bringing your perspectives. Because all of this stuff is, now diversity, equity, and inclusion is the right thing to do, of course, from that standpoint. But it's also the smart thing to do, because what you're trying to do is make your organization look like the market you serve at every level. So if you want to relate to your market better, or your potential market better, you have people inside your organization making those decisions who understand that market. So you want those people to come in feeling like they belong, being their whole selves, not self-censoring to try to look like a singular profile, which is a smaller and smaller piece of your market.
Yeah. What's a good story, maybe, to illustrate how belonging is done these days?
Well, it's sort of a unique story. So I have a friend who works for an organization, and she's been there for, I think, 30 years. So she's one of those long-term, very valuable employee. She had gone to work remotely from Europe because her mother was at the end of her life. And she was really struggling because losing your parents is one of the worst things that you can do. And so her company could have, given her a bonus, which they do all the time, or they could have done anything sort of normal. But what they did instead is they thought, what does she really need right now? And they realized that she really needed the comfort of one of her best friends. So they flew her best friend over to Europe to be there. And they said, we're flying you there. Tell us what you need in terms of resources so that we make sure that employee is okay through the worst time of her life. We want to support her personally as much as he can to know how much we care and value her. The money they spent on, they could have spent 10x that. She will never leave that organization. She feels like she belongs there. They're not her family. She has her family. They recognize that, but they wanted to support her in the care of her family by doing something very personalized.
Very good, very good. So, to me, that is also indicative of a strong work culture. So let's dive in a little bit about culture. It's a big deal these days. We want cultures of respect, psychological safety, shared values, et cetera, et cetera. But the hard part is maintaining the strong work culture and protecting it from being a toxic environment. Right. So here's where I'm going with this. Okay, how do we get to that point when we start to know, our work culture is becoming toxic? I mean, what are the warning signs? Can we see it? How do we detect it?
The number one warning sign seems to be cynicism. So when you start hearing, and you can pull your organizations officially with a third party, always with a third party, or you can be listening. If you hear in more and more cynicism that they don't believe the things you're saying, they don't believe you, you've lost trust, your culture's gone. So when you start hearing the cynicism, you go, wait, we gotta stop. We've lost trust in our organization, which is the most important thing in your organization.
Yeah, and I've seen it destroy obviously the lives of the workers in the organization, but also destroy the very essence of what makes that organization thrive. I mean, shareholders pull back and employees quit. I mean, it can literally bring down an organization. So you'll agree with me, the role of leader has really shifted over the last, I'm not going to say just during the pandemic, or during and after the pandemic, but I have seen the role of leader shift for the last maybe 10, 15 years. So tell us a little bit about how leadership is different now versus, back in the 90s or 2000s.
Yeah. So, Barry and Jim, who wrote the Leadership Challenge, will probably tell you, because I interviewed them for their last book, I know that they believe that good leadership has always been the same. But I think what has shifted is it's now, that was good leadership for great organizations. Now it's an imperative for every organization. So the leadership profile that was too frequent was somebody who self-selected to be a leader because they were a little insecure, and they could be the unquestioned expert. It was an unquestioned expert who could make decisions in certainty, lead with domination, fear, or even humiliation, myopically focus on productivity, and use punishments, threats, and rewards to motivate their people. All of those are now wrong, because most people at every level of an organization now are leading people who have skills and knowledge that they do not. So you can't be an expert on whatever the functional area of your organization is, plus cybersecurity, plus data analytics, plus generative, you just can't. So you can no longer make those decisions in certainty as an unquestioned expert. There are 4 fundamental shifts that we need to take to leadership. First is a shift in mindset from managing people and processes to enabling success. So it used to be you were the unquestioned expert who could make decisions in certainty, and your people reported to you and you were the boss. Well, now you report to the team. You enable their success, because if they're not successful, you're not successful. Second is a shift in culture. So when you were that unquestioned expert as a boss, you could pit your people against each other and rank them. But now they all have unique skills and knowledge. They can't be peers as competitors. They have to be peers as collaborators. Third is a shift in approach. So punishment, threats, and rewards used to work, that extrinsic pressure. Now you need intrinsic motivation, which Dan Pink proved 12 years ago was always superior. So you got to help activate the human potential in each member of your team. And then finally, it's a shift in behavior. We've not focused myopically on driving productivity anymore. Technology will handle a lot of that. Now it's about, how do I inspire potential? How do I inspire those teams to go out and explore and find new value? And so there's the 4 major shifts, and I'll add sort of an asterisk 5th on there. Is it used to be, as a leader, your goal was to drive the performance of today and maybe tomorrow. But now you've got to spend at least half your time developing the leaders of the future. You've got to develop that pipeline, because with this much churn in the market, you've got to always be preparing the next layer of leaders, because people could leave at any time across the organization. So it's, driving human potential in the teams today, but inspiring that human potential in the teams that will lead tomorrow. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, and then you talk about having these leadership superpowers of today, and how we must, make those superpowers our own if we raise the capacity to learn and grow in that sense. Maybe pick a couple of what those superpowers are that we can, apply in every day down in the trenches even.
Yeah. So it used to be that being the unquestioned expert boss. Now it's a humble, curious learner who feels comfortable saying those 4 scary words. I do not know. Let's find out. We have socialized our leaders to never say, I don't know. Now, if they don't say, I don't know, they're lying about something because they can't know all those things. So how do you get people comfortable saying, I don't know, let's find out. Well, let's ask this person who works for me but has more knowledge in this area. It's more about, it's a movement away from individual intelligence towards collective intelligence. So how do you do that? You start meetings. Rashad Tabakawala taught me this. You start meetings by one of four ways. You say, what's on your mind? Open-ended question allows them to tell you things that may not even be on your radar screen. Also gets things that are on the screen that they're looking at you through out of the way so they can have conversations clearly. Second, can I ask you for some advice? Since people reporting to you now have skills and knowledge that you don't, you can ask them to teach you something or help you with something. And then, can I help you? What are you working on? How can I help you be more successful? So instead of a task-based relationship, it's a relationship-based. It's very relational. And then finally, having that open communication with authenticity and vulnerability to say, can I give you some feedback? And can you give me some feedback? So we're both trying to improve our human performance.
So much of what you're talking about, as I reflect back on some of these principles and examples, goes back to all of the things I learned from the servant leadership literature that Robert Greenleaf brought to the forefront. Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask you a direct question about empathy. Why is empathy good for business?
Empathy is good for business because if you apply empathy to your customers, that's the foundation of innovation. So you're going to solve a problem they didn't know. Sometimes they didn't know they had. You didn't know they had if you empathize with them. So it's good for product development, new business models. Empathy towards your employees means you're focusing on activating their human potential. You're focusing on figuring out the conditions under which they thrive. So if you look at opportunity and capacity, empathy is the key to those two things.
Heather, what's your ultimate hope for people reading this book?
My ultimate hope for people reading this book is realizing that empathy is not something that diminishes performance. I got asked that kind of early on when the book first came out. Some of my first interviews, people were like, yeah, I get it. Empathy means I have to understand people's problems and then I have to expect less of them. And I thought, well, on certain days when they put their dog to sleep or their parent dies, yeah, as a human, you need to do those things. But really, empathy is a performance driver. It's helping people get in touch with their potential sometimes that they don't even know they have. So empathy is very actionable and leading towards higher levels of performance. And it's often thought of, I think, as the inverse, as something soft or woke.
Right. Yeah. Well, as we wind down here, Heather, I pose you the leadership love question tradition on this show. So I believe that love, which can be termed in different things. Some say compassion, care. Maybe some others would say empathy. So I call it love as the solution that will break strongholds of fear and uncertainty and bridge the divides. We're so entrenched in our corners these days, right? About the voices that we hear in our own head and all of the unconscious bias going on. Okay. So I think that love helps us to connect to one another and help us to feel like we all belong. And to me, that's a really good strategy for leading businesses and organizations, and especially our employees. So here's the question. How do we lead with practical and actionable love day in and day out?
Well, I think I tend to zoom out. So I think it's to zoom out and say, what's happened is we're living in a world of rapid uncertainty and change. We just went through a pandemic where the source of terror came from each other. We got it from each other. So we became sort of fearful of each other. We also got in touch with our compassion for a slight period of time there. And I think the reaction to uncertainty and change is, what's my right and who's to blame? When I think if we lead with love, it's what's my responsibility? How can I leave the world better than I found it? And how can we collectively go further together? And I think if we can get on that beat, we can see a decline in cruelty and a rise in kindness.
So good, Heather. That's so good. All right. We bring it home with two questions, as we do with every guest.
Okay.
Personally, what's really tugging at your heart right now that you'd like us to know?
I think it's the proliferation, and it might be fueled by my media. I don't want to blame the media, but it's maybe fueled by social media. In that, as I just said, that what's my right and who's to blame, as opposed to what's my responsibility? Where can I help? I mean, we wouldn't have won World War II with this mindset. We did not come together in the pandemic in the way that we should have. We should have been united against a common enemy. And if you took all the coronavirus in the world, I read this somewhere, it would not fill a Coke can. That's what we were. That's what we were fighting for 2 years.
Man.
And it was a nearly invisible enemy. It should have united us. Instead, it divided us. And I want to find that moment where there's a decline in cruelty and a rise in kindness and compassion.
Well stated. Finally, you close us out with that one thing you'd like our listeners to walk away with that will motivate them to take action.
When you elevate the potential in someone else, you reach your higher level of compassion and opportunity. If we leave the world better than we found it, we will do our best service to ourselves and each other.
Heather, it's been an enlightening conversation, and I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. All right. So if people want to connect with you and to find out more about you, where can they go? Send us places.
Well, to find out sort of, what I'm doing, where I'm going, where I speak, heathermcgowan.com. It's MCGOWAN. To engage with me and what I'm thinking about, and to be a provocation in that process, join me on LinkedIn, where I have a very active community. I post what I'm reading. People tag me in things they're reading that they want me to look at. That's my engaged learning community.
Perfect. Well, you can keep the conversation going on social media with hashtag Love in Action Podcast, and look for my show notes as well as a YouTube link to this very episode. And you can find all that on my website, plus Heather's contact info at marcelschwantes.com. And finally, if you're interested in sponsoring an episode of the show, let's chat. Reach me on my website or find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you for listening to the Love in Action podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, subscribe, and leave us a review. Until next time, don't forget, the future of leadership is love in action. Believe it, practice it, and watch your business grow.